Hapco members, I'm Brad Satin with Hapco Philadelphia, and this is a kind of what we're calling a Hapco Town Hall video conference. In an effort to try to keep members updated in these ever-changing times, the board wanted to create this question and answer video. It is Hapco's mission to educate, and now more than ever, it's important to get accurate information out there as it pertains to Philadelphia area landlords, property owners, and managers. We do want to say that depending on your circumstances, nothing replaces your own personal attorney or advisor for that advice. So what you hear here really should be taken in more of a general context. So with that disclaimer out of the way, joining us from the Hapco board today, Jim Sims and Rob Levin. And we also have Hapco's attorney with us, Paul Cohen. Guys, thanks so much for being here.
Good morning, Brad.
Good morning. So the board, I know, has been gathering questions from Hapco members in recent days, and we want to try to address as many of them as we can. A lot of these questions, no doubt, deal with rent and rent payment. So, Jim, let's start the first question for you. The question is, how should I address tenants who say they're not able to pay their entire rent, or maybe they say they can't pay part of their rent?
Okay, before I answer that real quickly, the first thing the landlord needs to do is document everything that they're doing. Write it down. You've also followed the normal protocol where if they're late with their rent, you send the late notice out. If it gets to the 15th day, send the notice to quit out, but along with friendly letters telling them to contact you and that you're willing to work things out with them, which will delay an eviction, because your goal is to keep them in the house. It's not to evict them. So once you get to the point where the tenant corresponds with you or calls you, at that point in time, negotiate a deal, but do not make it a verbal handshake deal. Put it in writing, have both parties, you and the landlord, sign it and agree to it so that there are terms and conditions that will be followed after the COVID has been lifted and they can start paying their rent again in a normal fashion. How it'll state whatever the agreement is on how they will catch up. Keep in mind, different tenants have different circumstances. So one tenant might say, hey, I can only pay $500 out of the $1,000. Another one might say, I can pay $800 out of the $1,000. Tailor the agreement to the tenant because incomes vary, families vary.
Sounds like good advice, Jim. Paul, what are your thoughts? Are you finding the tenants are, for the most part, paying their rent? We've gone through 1 month and we're approaching May 1st again. And are landlords working with the tenants?
So the landlords are absolutely working with the tenants. They are working out payment agreements with them. Most landlords are not charging a late charge for the month of April. What I'm finding out is that for the month of April, a lot of tenants, or I should say some tenants, because actually most of them have been paying, but some tenants have had a problem paying April's rent. They may have been laid off from their job. As you know, a lot of people were laid off. Their unemployment hasn't kicked in yet. But the reality is once that unemployment does kick in, the tenants will not only be getting their unemployment checks, and by the way, they're retroactive to when they were laid off. So they get this nice lump sum payment. In addition, under the CARES Act, they will get an additional $600 per week. That $600 per week will also be retroactive. So yes, we understand that during the month of April, in the beginning of the month, until the middle, even to the end of the month, until the state has been able to get the unemployment checks out, it was a little difficult for the tenants. But once those checks start coming out, the tenants should have the money to be able to pay the rent. And not only should they be able to pay the rent going forward, they should be able to get caught up on the back rent. So before you start making a deal with a tenant, you really want to see what the situation is. If the tenant lost their job, yes, it's a hardship, it's bad, but the reality is they may actually be making more with the extra $600 they're getting under the CARES Act than they were making when they were working. Please keep in mind that now you can't go out of your house. It's a stay-at-home order. So nobody can spend any money, right?
Right.
You can't go out to concerts. You can't drive your car. You're not spending money on gas. So the reality is people actually have more money than they did before. And on top of all that, the stimulus checks are going out.
Mm-hmm.
And an additional $1,200 or $2,400 if it's a married couple, an additional $500 per child that's under 16. That's a lot of money these tenants are going to have. So what you want to do as a landlord is make sure that when they get this money, they use the money to the rent, to pay the rent. You don't want that money going elsewhere, because if you let people pay the money elsewhere, guess what? That's what they're going to do. So be careful on how long you're making payment agreements for, and be careful with the payment, actual specific payment arrangements that you're making.
So let me ask you, Paul, we're talking about the CARES Act. Something else that's very timely is this PPP, this Paycheck Protection Program. It sounds like more funding is in the process of becoming available. Is that something landlords can go after? Did they go after it the first time, and has anything changed?
Nothing's changed with the additional money that's being funded. It's just going to be additional money. So basically what they changed in the act is the dollar amount that was appropriated for it was a certain amount, $349 billion before. They've increased that number. So they just basically said in that act, we're going to cross that number out and put in this new number, which I believe is another $310 billion that'll go toward that program. Basically, from a landlord's perspective, if you hire a management company, you have some type of management company that's running your properties, or you're even doing it yourself, you have your own management company, then you'd be entitled to collect money under the PPP program. If, however, it's passive income to the owner of the property, then you will not be able to get any money under the CARES Act, unfortunately.
Okay. So, and that's how it had been the first time around as well.
Correct.
Okay. Rob, let's get you in on the conversation. Here's the question. How can I go about renting my unit during this period? If you're not allowed to show units, how do you go about renting them?
A very good question, a very big problem. Since it is a non-essential task to re-rent apartments according to the state of Pennsylvania under the governor's order, it becomes virtually impossible for those that are homebound to be able to show properties, even if the property is vacant at the time that you're attempting to show it to prospectives. There are a couple of different ways that you are able to do it, some of which have been legacy methods, like having file photographs emailed to prospective tenants, and if they are willing to accept those photographs as constituted and are willing to apply, you might get lucky and be able to secure a tenant even though they haven't seen the place in reality. Another concept is, if you're able to, if you can get to the property and get through the property in between tenants, once your old tenant has moved out, is to take a video, and an iPhone video, and take a walkthrough and describe it. If you are attempting to re-rent the property after you've received notice from your tenant 30 or 60 days in advance, depending on how your leases are written, you may, depending on the relationship with your outgoing tenant, be able to make a kind request for cooperation and ask your tenant to take you for a friendly walkthrough and have them email a short video clip, which you can then forward along. Many landlords have found that tenants are in fact happy to help. We're all in this together, as everybody's been saying.
Okay. Good advice, Rob. Thanks. Paul, back to you again. Let's talk a little bit. There's been some conversation of rent strikes. Can you tell us what they are? Are they legal? And what are these tenant organizations even asking for to avoid them?
So a rent strike is not legal. It's not something that should be happening. You're basically telling somebody to breach a contract. A lease is a contract agreement, and these people that are advocating for rent strikes are saying, we want you to break the law. We want you to breach this agreement that you have with your landlord. That's just not right. Your reputable tenant organizations realize that and do not support it. Anyone that is supporting it is, I want to say this in a politically correct way. Let's put it this way, they're not acting properly. How's that? Okay.
Yeah.
You sometimes over history have seen rent strikes in properties where you had a landlord that wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing, like with repairs. Let's say there was no heat in an entire building. So the tenants in a building would get together and say, we're going to have a rent strike because we got to get heat in our building. And it's the only way to get the landlord's attention. What these people are doing in Philadelphia is they're trying to get a rent strike citywide. They're trying to get every single tenant, whether they're able to pay the rent, whether they can't pay the rent, whether it's a good landlord that's doing everything they're supposed to do, they don't care. They just are asking for every single tenant to not pay the rent. That's just outrageous. It's something that just should not be happening and shouldn't be condoned in any way, shape, or form.
And it's obviously something Hapco Philadelphia is going to continue to keep tabs on. So stay with us, because as we learn more, we'll of course pass it on to our members. Okay, next question. Let's get Jim in on the conversation, talking about maintenance workers, Jim, and whether they're essential or non-essential in the government's eyes. Can you explain that?
Sure. Let's break maintenance workers into two classifications. If you're doing ongoing deferred maintenance, like going in and cleaning windows in the spring, that is not considered essential. If, however, a pipe breaks and it's leaking, sending someone out to repair it, that is essential and needs to be done. So again, you have to really consider things. Giving an example, a tenant may call and say, my kid threw a toy, put a hole in the wall, and I need to get it fixed. And if it's a pre-1978 house, I would consider that essential because it could release lead dust. So you have to use a little common sense and just keep in mind, if someone's life or safety is at jeopardy or damage to the building that could harm someone, it is essential. Cleaning your windows is not.
Anybody else want to get in on that conversation? Do we all agree?
Yes, and I just want to add that the definition of essential or life-sustaining function is a big gray area. Nobody's really sure what exactly that means. And people are doing it based on a case-by-case basis and looking at the actual situation of what's going on and making that determination. In making that determination, landlords also need to consider the fact that tenants don't want you in their units. So if you want to do routine maintenance, tenants are good. It's hard enough to get in when there's an emergency. And I've had lots of situations where clients have called me and said, we have this emergency, we need to get into the tenant's unit, and they just won't let us in. They're not infected and they don't want to get infected and they don't want you in their unit. And we have to get in. So it's a huge problem trying to get in when it's not an emergency. And in addition to that, you have your maintenance technicians. They don't want to go into the units. So unless it's really something that needs to be performed, our recommendation is that you shouldn't be doing it right now.
Okay.
I'd like to add one thing on that too. If you are sending a maintenance worker in, give them the proper coverings for his feet, the mask, something to wipe his hands with, cleaning supplies, so they can enter and leave in a safe way without leaving something behind.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jim. And what's interesting about that is the advice that you get is changing daily from the CDC. So a month ago, they were recommending one thing with regard to what you should be doing when you go into a unit. A week ago, they were recommending something else. Now it's completely different. As we all know, initially CDC just said, when you go out, you don't need a mask, right? They were saying masks don't help, don't need a mask. Now the advice is you need a mask. Well, it's the same thing with maintenance technicians. The advice that the CDC is giving is constantly changing. In next week, 2 weeks, it's going to change again as things start opening up. So our recommendation to everybody is check the CDC's website. It's really good. There's a lot of information on there that tells you exactly what you should be doing.
One final thought, if I can, Brad,
Sure.
on the essential workers, as Paul mentioned, it's a huge gray area whereby some may consider standard janitorial work, cleaning and washing, to be an essential job. However, the CDC or the state of Pennsylvania may not consider standard cleaning to be essential, only if the so-termed deep cleaning is done. However, a passerby really wouldn't know the difference between doing a deep cleaning or simply vacuuming and dusting hallways in an apartment building, for example, without doing some deep research. So there's a lot of disinformation out there, and problems have cropped up with neighbors actually calling the city's 311 number to complain that work is being done when in fact precautions are being taken and sanitation efforts are being made and then shut down.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the rules are ever changing. And as Paul mentioned, there's a big gray area right now. Rob, while we have you, another question for you, and this deals with insurance coverage. Am I able to claim loss of use and get money from my insurance company due to the government shutting down? If you can't rent a place, can you try to get insurance from it?
Well, this is something that Hapco has been on the forefront with, and with the state of Pennsylvania, and it's working its way through the state Senate in Harrisburg as we speak. We don't know the results yet, but we've been in constant contact with all of our representatives, not only in the Philadelphia area, but throughout the state, through our associate organization, the PROA, and working very closely with the players in PROA and the contacts in the State House when it comes to being able to claim that a lack of use or loss of use is a fair and legitimate claim to be made against an insurance policy, which would normally be prohibited except under such circumstances as fire or flood, where you have rent protection built into your commercial policy. The insurance companies are no doubt going to hold that right in the policies are clearly written that pandemics are excluded, just as other exclusions are rife throughout people's policies. However, there is a groundswell that is stating that, in effect, your building has suffered the same type of damage that a fire or flood has occurred, and prevents you from managing your property properly, prevents you from re-renting it adequately, and as a result, there is a real and true loss of rent revenue, therefore entitled to be able to claim under the terms of the policy. So it's working its way through, but there is an extremely large amount of interest in it, and that interest originated from the restaurant and bar groups who approached the State House with the same complaint. If the state is shutting us down, you've effectively put us out of business, not of our own doing.
Right. Jim, let me ask you, we're talking about what's working its way through government. What can you tell us from what you're hearing on the government levels that landlords should know about at this point? What else is happening out there right now, knowing that it's changing all the time?
Yeah, there's several conversations going on that eventually Philadelphia will receive money from the federal government. And there are different agencies within Philadelphia, one of them being OESS, stands for the Office of Emergency Shelter Systems. They're looking for ways to dispense the money. excuse me, that was our friend Maz.
Hmm.
So anyway, they're looking for ways to dispense the money, and Hapco has offered to collect data for them because the landlord is the natural place where all the information gravitates. So we would gather the information, meaning the landlord, through a portal that we would set up for them, and it would get dispersed to the different agencies, however the city should choose. We're waiting to hear back if they want to join us in that, um, I guess, in that computer portal or not. Even if they don't, they're trying to come up with their own ways of dispensing money to tenants that are falling through loopholes. And it would be a great way of helping landlords.
Yeah. Paul, let me ask you, and you kind of addressed this, but it's a question that came in, and I'm wondering if there's anything more to it. It's simply, is there any stimulus money for landlords? Anything else we haven't discussed that landlords should look into?
There is the idle loan, EIDL, that is part of the CARES package, and additional money was just appropriated for that as well. Initially, when the program came out, you could get $10,000 basically as a grant up front, and then you could borrow additional money at 3.75%. So that money was available. It's been refunded, so there's additional money that's available for that. I understand that the $10,000 grants ran out rather quickly, and they started making it $1,000 per employee. With the additional money, don't know yet how they're going to be distributing that, whether they'll up it again to the $10,000, maybe it'll be $5,000. We don't know where that's going to come out, but that's something that landlords can get through the CARES Act.
Very good. Paul, last question for you. Dealing with mortgages, are landlords' mortgage companies willing to work with them? As landlords begin to struggle potentially to pay, what can they do?
A lot of mortgage companies are working with landlords. Basically, what they're doing is a forbearance of the mortgage payments, which means that the interest still continues to accumulate. You just don't have to make the monthly payments for right now. So you can get a forbearance for a month, 2 months, 3 months, sometimes up to 6 months, depending on the situation. The problem with that is that you still owe the money on the back end, and the interest is still accumulating. Yes, it's good short term, and it'll help you get through these difficult times, but over the long haul, you're still going to have to pay that money back. Additionally, under the CARES Act, you're able to get, if you have a federally funded mortgage, or you have a property that gets Section 8 assistance, low-income housing tax credit, some type of federal aid, then you can get automatically up to a 6-month extension on that mortgage. But again, forbearance. It's not a forgiveness.
Understood. Understood. Those are the questions we have coming in. I thought maybe we can end it by kind of doing a loop around. One final, Jim, go ahead, and then kind of final thoughts here. Go ahead, Jim.
Sure. There are two websites that I think landlords need to look at. One of them is dced.pa.gov. It has a lot of good information there. The other one, if they're looking at trying to go to one of these programs, obviously go to your bank, but also look at sba.org. That's the Small Business Administration. Their website has some good information too.
And I'd also like to add that the Hapco website has all of this information there. So for folks who haven't kind of yet been drawn to check out the news section of our Hapco website, all of this information and a lot more is there as well. Go ahead.
Paul was so kind that he actually put sample forms on the Hapco website, notice to quit, and different ways to communicate with your tenants. I highly suggest, I believe it's under news, I highly suggest that you go take a look at that.
Yep, good advice. Rob, any final thought?
In addition to what Jim is saying, don't forget that the forum is a valuable place to exchange ideas between members, to ask questions, to get recommendations and suggestions for things as simple in normal times as a referral for a contractor, for a roofer, or for an electrician, and under pressing times like this to find out interesting information and exchange information, much the same as we're doing here on this panel, is to get ready answers to questions that you may have. So yes, you're going to want to check the website, you're going to want to check the forum, and when it comes to dealing with COVID-19, I know that as a general rule, all of the warm and fuzzy commercials that we are seeing on TV and the endless news loop that we are watching, as if anything really productive is going to come out of our days and days and days on end, is to, in fact, be very positive thinking. Remember, real estate will be there after COVID-19 goes away. We who own property and manage property are in a very, very positive position long term, where unfortunately many in other industries are not.
Good advice. And finally, Paul, from the legal aspect, I think we've covered a lot. Anything else we've left out?
I just want to say that housing is a basic need that humans have. It's like food. You need to have food, you need shelter, you need housing. When there isn't enough money for tenants and tenants can't afford to pay the rent and they aren't provided that housing need, it's up to the government to give them the money. You should not be passing laws, regulations, and putting that burden on a particular group of people, namely landlords. It's just like food, okay? Food is a basic need that everybody has. If somebody can't afford food, the government should step in, which they do. And there's programs, right? You can get food stamps. There's nonprofit organizations that have food pantries. There's ways that they figure out to pay, to give money to people so that they can eat and or give them food. What you don't do is go to the grocery store or the grocers or the supermarket owners and say, hey, you know what? You guys have to give everybody free food. That's not what happens. You don't make the supermarkets pay for everyone's food. If as a society we determine that that's a basic need that we want to provide for, then the government needs to provide for it, not the grocery stores. So you don't pass a law that says, hey, you know what? We're going to have a food freeze. We're going to freeze the prices that you can charge because people can't afford it. Because what's going to happen? The grocery stores are going to go out of business. It doesn't make any sense. If you as a society want to provide food for people, provide food for people. It's the same thing with housing, and people just don't get it. If you want to provide housing for people, then guess what? Give them the money. In a way, the government does do that. We have Section 8 vouchers or housing choice vouchers. There's low-income housing tenant tax credits where people can get money to be able to pay their rent. That's great. It's wonderful. But you don't expand it to the point where you say, oh, you know what? It's not enough. So now what we're going to do is put a rent freeze on, or we're going to have a rent strike. Could you imagine a food strike where they just said, you know what? Everyone, just go to your supermarket, get as much food as you want, take it all, and you don't have to pay for it. We're just going to have a food strike. Everyone's going to go ahead and do it. It's outrageous. And as outrageous as that sounds when you think about it, that's exactly what they're trying to do in the housing industry. So you know what? There's all these trillions of dollars that's out there, right? They're coming out with trillions. There was 2.7 trillion we're up to so far. There's probably going to be another $2 trillion, if not more than that, with the stimulus 4, right? Where's the money for the housing? Where's the money for the tenants? You want to provide for the tenants. That's what the tenant organizations, and quite frankly, us as landlords, we need to do that too. We need to push to get the money to the tenants, not to come back and say, hey, you know what? We're going to put this new regulation or more laws and charge the landlords and make them pay for these tenants.
Good information for sure. Paul, Rob, Jim, guys, thanks so much for joining us. And for those of you watching at home, thank you for watching. Hopefully this answers some questions you have. We will be planning another town hall as needed. Hapco, remember, is committed to addressing members' concerns. So make sure you go to our website for the very latest information. You can also get that same information updated very frequently on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. You can find our handles on the screen here. A lot of good information available through Hapco. Thanks so much, everybody, for being with us today, and please stay healthy. I'm Brad Satin, and we'll see you again soon.